Every fork in the restaurant stopped moving when Patrice lowered herself to the floor. Terence had swept her napkin off the table, then slipped the waiter 2 50s and whispered, "Enjoy the show." His mistress watched, smiling. The whole room waited for Patrice to break. She didn't. She picked up the napkin, folded it once, and placed it beside her plate with steady hands. Then she looked past them, to the couple seated 3 tables behind. They weren't strangers. The restaurant was called Monarch's. One of those places in downtown Atlanta where the lighting stayed low, the jazz stayed soft, and the prices stayed high enough to make sure everybody in the room felt important. White tablecloths, real candles, the kind of place where you dress to be seen. And on this Friday evening, everybody was seeing Patrice. She was on the floor, both knees pressed against cold marble tile, her fingers reaching forward for a cloth napkin that her own husband had knocked off the table with the back of his hand, not by accident, not even close. Terence did it the way someone flicks a crumb off a counter, like it didn't matter, like she didn't matter, like this was just another Friday night in a marriage where he had already decided she was beneath him. Then he leaned toward the waiter, a young man no older than 23 who had been refilling water glasses 2 tables over, and slid 2 crisp $50 bills across the tablecloth. "Keep your eyes open," Terence said, loud enough for the tables on either side to hear. "My wife's about to do the only thing she's actually good at." The waiter froze. His hand hovered above the bills like he didn't want to touch them, but he took them, and he stood there, eyes low, jaw tight, because what else was he supposed to do when a man in a $3,000 suit tells you to watch his wife crawl? Sitting across from Terence was a woman named Rochelle. Smooth skin, red nails, a dress that caught the candlelight in a way that said she picked it for exactly this kind of room. She wasn't introduced as Terence's mistress, of course. She was introduced to the couple at the next table as his business consultant. But there was nothing businesslike about the way she pressed her wine glass against her bottom lip and watched Patrice lower herself to the floor. She didn't laugh. She did something worse. She watched with a kind of satisfied stillness that said she had been promised this moment, like it was a gift, like she had earned it. Like watching another woman crawl was the proof she needed that she had already won. A woman 2 tables over put her hand over her mouth. A man near the window looked at his wife and shook his head slowly. The jazz quartet kept playing, but the rhythm felt wrong now. Like even the music knew something was breaking in this room. Patrice's fingers closed around the napkin, and as she reached, the pearl bracelet on her wrist caught the candlelight. It was a simple piece, 3 strands of small freshwater pearls with a gold clasp. The kind of thing most people wouldn't notice unless they were looking. But Patrice noticed it every single day. Her grandmother had placed it on her wrist the morning of her wedding, had held her hands and looked her in the eye and said, "Wear it when you're sure." Patrice had worn it every day since, through the good years, through the quiet ones, through the ones that started to feel like a slow betrayal she couldn't yet name. She rose slowly. She didn't rush. She didn't smooth her dress with shame or duck her head the way Terence expected her to. She folded the napkin once, precise, calm, and placed it beside her plate. Then she adjusted the bracelet, rotated it gently so the clasp faced upward. Her hands were completely steady. Terence barely looked at her. He was already leaning into Rochelle, whispering something that made Rochelle smile with her eyes closed. But Patrice wasn't looking at either of them. She looked past them, 3 tables deep, where a well-dressed couple sat with their hands folded and their eyes wide open. The man, mid-40s, clean-shaven, wearing a charcoal suit, gave Patrice the faintest nod, almost invisible. The kind of nod that says, "I see you, and I'm here, and it's almost time." They were not strangers. Terence didn't notice. He was too busy being Terence, too busy basking in the glow of a woman who laughed at his jokes and never questioned his decisions and made him feel like the most powerful man in every room he walked into. That was the thing about Terence. He never noticed what Patrice noticed. He never paid attention to the quiet. He only paid attention to the noise. And because Patrice made no noise that night, no tears, no trembling lip, no sharp words flung across the table, he assumed he had won. He had no idea he was sitting inside someone else's plan. 7 years earlier, Terence had been the kind of man women warned each other about. Not because he was dangerous, but because he was convincing. Tall, broad shoulders. The type who looked you in the eye when he spoke and made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He found Patrice at a networking mixer in Buckhead. She was 26, working as a junior accountant at a mid-size firm, wearing a navy blazer she had ironed twice that morning because the first press left a crease she didn't like. He told her on their third date, sitting across from her at a small Italian restaurant in Midtown, "You make me want to be the man my father never was." And Patrice, who had grown up watching her own mother raise 3 kids without a man who stayed, believed him. Not because she was naive. Not because she was desperate, but naive. Not because she was desperate, but because she wanted it to be true. And because the way he said it, leaning forward with both hands wrapped around his coffee mug, made her believe he meant it with his whole chest. The first 3 years were good. Real good. The kind of good that makes you forget to worry. Patrice managed the household finances while Terence built his commercial real estate firm from the ground up. She caught a tax error on his first major lease that his own attorney had missed. Saved him $40,000 before he even knew it was gone. Terence told everyone at dinner parties, hand on her shoulder, "This woman right here, she's my backbone. I don't make a move without her." And she was. She was the backbone. She was the one who sat up until midnight reviewing contracts. She was the one who noticed the discrepancy in the third-quarter projections that would have cost him a client. She did it quietly, without asking for credit, because that's who she was. And for 3 years, that was enough. But then his mother started coming around more often. Lorraine Washington was a woman who carried her opinions the way some people carry designer handbags. Everywhere, always visible, and always more expensive than they needed to be. She lived out in Stone Mountain and came to their house every other Sunday for dinner. At first, the comments were small. "Terence, you remember the Whitfield girl from church? Her father just bought half of Decatur." Or at Thanksgiving, seated at the head of the table Patrice had spent 2 days preparing, Lorraine would look directly at her and say, "You're lucky my son chose loyalty over logic." Patrice would clear the plates. She wouldn't respond. Not because she didn't have words. Patrice always had words. But because she understood something about Lorraine that Terence never would. That the woman wasn't just making conversation. She was making a case, building a file, laying bricks one comment at a time toward a conclusion she had already reached. By year 5, the shifts started showing up in ways that couldn't be ignored. Terence began attending what he called investor dinners, alone. His phone screen started facing down on the nightstand every night. He opened a second credit card Patrice only discovered because the statement was mailed to their home by mistake. She looked at the charges. Restaurants she'd never been to, a boutique in Midtown, a spa in Roswell, a hotel in Buckhead. None of it was for her. One evening, she found a gift receipt tucked inside the pocket of a blazer he'd left on the bedroom chair. Cartier. A bracelet. Patrice didn't own anything from Cartier. She held the receipt between 2 fingers and looked at it for a long time. Then she folded it carefully and placed it back exactly where she found it. She said nothing, but she started watching, not with anger, not with panic, with the kind of still, patient attention that a woman develops when she has been lied to before and refuses to be surprised by it again. Lorraine's energy had changed too. She was warmer toward Terence now, softer, almost conspiratorial, and colder toward Patrice. Shorter sentences, fewer invitations, the way someone treats a person they've already mentally replaced. Around this same time, Patrice was reviewing their joint tax filings, something she did every quarter, quietly, the way she did everything. She noticed a commercial lease Terence had signed under his firm's name for a property in Midtown Atlanta. The address didn't match any of his listed holdings. She had never heard him mention it. She bookmarked it in her mind, the way an accountant bookmarks a number that doesn't add up, and she moved on. She didn't ask. She didn't argue. She kept her eyes open and her mouth closed. Because Patrice had learned something a long time ago. When you grow up watching someone you love get blindsided, you learn to read the room before the room reads you, and what Patrice was reading now told her that the life she thought she was building was already being dismantled behind her back by the very people who were supposed to protect it. The Tuesday that changed everything started like any other. Terence was in Charlotte for a 2-day conference. The house was quiet. Patrice went into his office looking for a spare house key she needed to give the plumber. She opened the second drawer of his desk, and beneath the key, tucked under a stack of old business cards, she found it. A phone. Not the one he carried every day. A second one. Black case. No lock screen. She didn't panic. She sat down in his leather office chair, pressed the power button, and waited for the screen to glow. Text messages. 14 months of them, between Terence and a woman named Rochelle. The messages weren't just flirtatious. They were strategic, organized, like two people running a project together. Rochelle asking about the timeline. Terence replying, "Once the new property closes, I'll move the assets. She won't know until it's done." Rochelle responding with a laughing emoji and the words, "Your mama was right about her." Patrice scrolled further, and then she found the group text. 3 names, Terence, Rochelle, Lorraine. Lorraine had written, "I told you from the beginning she wasn't built for this family. Rochelle understands the life. Handle it before the next tax year." Terence's reply, "Already in motion, Ma." Patrice set the phone down on the desk. She didn't cry. She didn't throw it against the wall. She didn't scream into the empty house. She sat in that chair for 11 minutes without moving. The air conditioner hummed through the vents. A bird hit the window lightly and flew away. The house settled around her like it was holding its breath too. Then she picked the phone back up. She photographed every message, every text, every timestamp, every laughing emoji. She screenshotted the Midtown property address from the thread. She placed the phone back exactly where she found it. Same angle, same drawer, same position beneath the spare key. If Terence checked, he would never know it had been touched. The next afternoon, Patrice drove to the Midtown address. It was a luxury condominium building. Glass lobby, marble floors, a doorman in a grey suit who nodded at residents and ignored everyone else. She parked across the street and turned the engine off. She waited. 20 minutes later, Rochelle walked out the front door. Hair pressed, sunglasses pushed up on her head, carrying a set of keys like she owned the building. She climbed into a white Mercedes parked in the designated tenant spot, a car that Patrice knew was registered under Terence's firm because she had reviewed every vehicle listed on their business insurance policy 2 months earlier during quarterly taxes. She took photographs. The car, the license plate, Rochelle's face in the driver's seat through the windshield, the building number above the entrance. She took each photo with the calm precision of a woman documenting evidence, not emotion. She didn't zoom in on Rochelle's smile. She didn't linger on the vanity plate Terence had probably picked out himself. She just took the pictures and set the phone in her lap. A couple walked by on the sidewalk, pushing a stroller. A dog barked somewhere behind the building. The world kept going like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The woman sitting in that parked car across from the building where her husband's mistress lived, she was not the same woman who had woken up that morning. Then she drove home, hands steady on the wheel, eyes dry, jaw set. The radio was off. The only sound was the hum of the highway and the steady rhythm of her own breathing. That night, sitting on the edge of the bed she still shared with Terence, she picked up her personal phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in over a year. When the voice on the other end answered, Patrice said 5 words: "I'm ready to move forward." She hung up and placed the phone on the nightstand. She looked at the pearl bracelet on her wrist, touched it once, and for the first time in months, something behind her eyes shifted. Not sadness, not rage, but the kind of hard, clear focus that comes when a person finally stops hoping and starts deciding. His name was Glenn Pryor. He and Patrice had been in the same graduating class at Spelman and Morehouse. Back then, he was the quiet one in the study group who always brought highlighters in 4 different colors and never spoke louder than a library voice. Now he was a forensic accountant who specialized in financial fraud recovery, the kind of man corporations feared and divorce attorneys loved, the kind of man you called when you needed to follow money through walls. They met at his office the following week. Patrice brought everything: the screenshots, the Midtown property address, the joint account records, the tax filings, the business insurance policy with the Mercedes listed under Terence's LLC. She laid it all across his conference table the way a surgeon lays out instruments, organized, deliberate, nothing missing. Glenn reviewed every document in silence. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "Patrice, this isn't just infidelity. This is asset fraud. He's been transferring marital property into shell accounts tied to his firm. If you let me trace this, I can build a case that doesn't just protect you in court. It exposes everyone involved." She looked at him across the table. "Do it." She also quietly consulted a divorce attorney named Wanda Okafor, a woman who had been referred to her by a friend from church and who worked out of a small office in Decatur that smelled like cinnamon and old law books. Patrice didn't file yet. She asked one question: "If I can prove asset concealment and third-party collusion, what happens to the people who helped him?" Wanda looked at her over the rims of her reading glasses and said, "They lose everything they tried to hide, and depending on how deep it goes, they could face accessory charges." Patrice left the office and sat in her car in the parking lot for 10 minutes. She wasn't emotional. She was calculating, running numbers in her head the same way she'd run them for Terence's firm for 7 years, except this time the numbers were for her. Meanwhile, Terence was getting bolder. He had stopped hiding and started performing. He brought Rochelle to a charity brunch in Buckhead where half the women in the room had been to Patrice's baby shower planning committee. He brought her to a fundraiser at his business partner's home, where she stood beside him in a doorway like she belonged there, and he didn't once introduce Patrice to anyone new the entire evening. At the charity brunch, in front of a table full of women who had known Patrice for years, Rochelle placed her hand on Terence's forearm, slowly, deliberately, like she was pressing a claim into his skin, and said with a smile that didn't quite reach past her teeth, "You're so lucky to have a husband who knows how to take care of people." The table went quiet. Not the polite kind of quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when everyone sees the same thing but nobody wants to be the first to name it. Every woman at that table looked at Patrice, waiting, watching. Patrice looked at Rochelle, held her gaze for 3 full seconds, then smiled and said, "I am." The table exhaled. But something in the air had changed, and the woman sitting to Patrice's left, a woman named Sandra, who had known Patrice for 5 years, put her hand on Patrice's knee under the table and squeezed once. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. 2 weeks later, Lorraine called. Her voice was light and rehearsed, the way it always was when she was delivering something she had already decided in private. She told Patrice she was hosting a family dinner the following month. Just something small. You know how I like to bring everyone together. Then, almost as an afterthought, the way someone mentions the weather before hanging up, she added, "And Terence is bringing a guest. I think it'll be nice for you to meet some of his professional circle. You know you don't get out enough, Patrice." The words landed like a slap wrapped in silk. Patrice understood exactly what that meant. Lorraine wasn't hosting a dinner. She was staging an introduction, preparing the family to receive Rochelle not as a colleague, not as a friend, but as a replacement, before a single divorce paper had been signed, before a single honest conversation had been had. Lorraine was setting the table, literally and figuratively, for the woman she had chosen to take Patrice's place. She hung up the phone and stared at the wall. Then she opened her laptop and began making a guest list of her own, for a very different kind of evening. Over the next 3 weeks, Patrice moved with the precision of someone who had stopped hoping and started building. She coordinated with Glenn. She confirmed timelines with Wanda. She reached out to the general manager at Monarchs, a woman named Valerie she had met through a community fundraiser 2 years earlier, and reserved the private dining space for Terrence's upcoming firm anniversary celebration. Terrence didn't question it. He was flattered that Patrice was finally showing interest in his professional life. He told Rochelle on the phone that night, laughing while Patrice was in the next room, "She's actually trying. It's almost sad." Rochelle laughed too. They had no idea what they were walking into, and that was the thing about people who think they're winning. They stop looking at the board. Something changed in Patrice around this time, and everyone who saw her could feel it even if nobody could name it. She started dressing differently. Not flashier, but sharper. Cleaner lines. Hair pulled back. She carried herself the way people carry themselves when they've made a decision and stopped being afraid of it. Terrence noticed. One night, lying in bed with the lights off, he turned toward her and said, "You seem different lately. What's going on with you?" Patrice didn't look up from her book. "I'm just focusing on what matters." He stared at the back of her head for a long time. Then he rolled over and said nothing. He couldn't read her. And for the first time in a very long time, that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. At a cocktail event at Monarchs 3 weeks before the firm anniversary dinner, Patrice moved through the room with a quiet ease that made people look twice. She knew the general manager by name. She chatted with the waitstaff like she'd known them for years. She complimented the bartender's tie and asked how his daughter's piano recital had gone. People were drawn to her in a way they hadn't been before. Or maybe in a way Terrence had never allowed space for. He watched her from across the room. His hand rested on the small of Rochelle's back, but his eyes kept drifting toward Patrice. Something behind his expression shifted. Not guilt, not love, but the faintest trace of suspicion. The kind of suspicion that comes when a person you've underestimated starts acting like they know something you don't. He pulled Rochelle closer, the way a man grabs a railing when the floor beneath him shifts. And then Rochelle made a mistake. She walked up to Patrice near the bar, champagne flute in hand, and looked down at the pearl bracelet on her wrist. She tilted her head to the side and said with a smile, thin as paper, "That bracelet is beautiful. Is it vintage? It looks like something from a grandmother's jewelry box." The women standing nearby went quiet. Not suddenly, but the way a room goes quiet when someone says something that lands heavier than they intended. Patrice looked down at the bracelet, touched it lightly with her fingertips, then looked Rochelle directly in the eye and said, "It is from my grandmother. She gave it to me the day I made the best decision of my life." Rochelle's smile didn't drop, but it froze. Her eyes searched Patrice's face for a crack, a flinch, a tremor, anything she could use. She found nothing. She turned away without another word and walked back toward Terrence with her chin up and her heels clicking a little too fast on the hardwood floor. But the women at the bar saw it. Every one of them. And the energy in the room tilted like a table with one short leg. It was a small moment, barely 5 seconds. But it was the kind of moment that makes people whisper on the drive home. "Did you see the way she said that?" Patrice stayed another 20 minutes. She confirmed details with Valerie. She spoke with Glenn's wife near the dessert table. She touched the bracelet one last time before stepping into the night air. She didn't feel nervous. She didn't feel vengeful. She felt like a woman standing at the edge of something she had already decided to jump into, not out of recklessness, out of certainty. The night of the anniversary dinner arrived the way the best storms do. Quietly. Monarchs had been set for 40 guests, round tables draped in white linen, tea candles in glass holders that threw soft yellow light across the room, a small stage near the back wall where Terence planned to give his toast. The jazz quartet was playing something slow and golden, and the room smelled like garlic butter and expensive cologne. Terence had organized the evening to celebrate 7 years of his firm's growth. That was the official reason. But everyone who knew him well enough understood what this really was. A soft debut. Rochelle sat near the front table in a new dress Terence had paid for. Her posture said arrival. Lorraine was seated at the head table, back straight, chin raised, watching the room the way a woman watches a plan she planted finally coming into bloom. Patrice sat 2 seats from Terence, quiet, composed, the pearl bracelet on her wrist catching the candlelight every time she reached for her water glass. Glenn and his wife were seated 3 tables behind Terence, close enough to see everything, far enough to go unnoticed. Glenn had a leather folder beside his chair. His wife placed her hand on his arm and squeezed once. Midway through dinner, Terence stood. The room quieted. He buttoned his jacket with one hand and raised his glass with the other. He thanked his team. He thanked his clients. He thanked his mother for always believing in the vision. Then he turned his body slightly toward Rochelle. Not fully, but enough for everyone to feel it, and said, "And to the woman who's helped me see what a real partnership looks like." The room applauded politely. A few people exchanged glances. Rochelle lowered her eyes with rehearsed modesty. Lorraine smiled. The jazz quartet played a little louder. Patrice clapped once. Slowly. The sound was clear enough that 2 people at the next table turned their heads. Then she stood up. The room didn't go silent all at once. It went silent in layers. First, the table closest to her, then the one behind. Then the one near the window, like a wave pulling back from shore, leaving nothing but wet sand and the sound of breathing. Patrice didn't raise her voice. She spoke the way someone speaks when they've rehearsed nothing, because the truth doesn't need rehearsal. "I want to thank my husband, too," she said. Her voice was steady, warm even, like she was making a toast of her own, for 7 years of marriage, for the home we built together, for the life I believed we were sharing. She paused, let the room lean in, and for the luxury condominium at 1412 Piedmont Circle in Midtown, the one purchased with funds from our joint business account, that is currently occupied by the woman sitting at the front table. The room didn't breathe. Rochelle's hand froze around her wine glass. Terence's smile collapsed one muscle at a time, like a building losing floors. Patrice continued, calm, measured, like she was reading a quarterly earnings report. The property was purchased through a shell LLC filed under Terence's firm, an entity I was never informed about. The white Mercedes parked in the building's tenant garage is registered to the same LLC. I have the title, documentation. I have the bank transfer records, and I have 14 months of text messages between my husband, this woman, and my mother-in-law, who helped plan every step of it. She didn't look at Lorraine. She didn't need to. Every head in the room turned toward the head table on its own. Lorraine's mouth opened. Her hand gripped the edge of the tablecloth. Nothing came out. Patrice's voice stayed level. My mother-in-law wrote in one of those messages, and I'll only share this one line, she wasn't built for this family. She let the words sit in the air like smoke. Then said quietly, I want to thank her for that too, because it made everything very clear. Glenn stood from his seat 3 tables back. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't need to. He walked forward carrying the leather folder and stopped beside Terence's business partner at the adjacent table. "My name is Glenn Pryor. I'm a certified forensic accountant. I've spent the last 3 months documenting every hidden transfer, every shell entity, and every marital asset that was moved without Mrs. Washington's knowledge or consent." He placed the folder on the table. "This is a summary. The full report has already been filed with her legal counsel." The room was so quiet you could hear the candle flames bending. Terence stood there with his glass still raised halfway. His mouth was slightly open. No words came. His eyes moved from Glenn to the folder to Patrice to Rochelle and back to Patrice, like a man scanning a room for an exit that had already been sealed. Patrice reached down and unclasped the pearl bracelet from her wrist. She held it in her palm for a moment, looked at it the way someone looks at something they've loved for a long time and are finally ready to set down. Then she placed it on the table in front of Terence. "My grandmother gave me this the day I married you," she said. "She told me, 'Wear it when you're sure.' I wore it tonight because I have never been more sure of anything in my life." She paused, met his eyes one final time. "I'm done." Nobody moved. Rochelle stood up suddenly, clutching her purse against her ribs. She tried to leave, but the room was arranged in tight rows and every single pair of eyes followed her as she squeezed between chairs, her heels catching on the carpet, her breathing too fast. Valerie stood near the exit with her hands clasped. She didn't block the door. She didn't need to. Rochelle pushed past her into the hallway and vanished into the night. Nobody followed. Nobody called her name. Lorraine gripped the table with both hands. Her jaw was clenched so tight the tendons in her neck stood out like wire. She looked at Terence, waiting for him to fix it, waiting for him to say something, anything that would undo the last 3 minutes. He didn't. He just stood there, glass still in his hand, ice melting slowly into the bourbon. The jazz quartet had stopped playing. One of the musicians had set down his trumpet and was looking at the floor for what felt like a full minute, though it was probably 8 or 9 seconds. Nobody in that dining room spoke. Not a fork moved, not a chair shifted. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of every lie that had just been cracked open in front of every person who mattered to the man still standing frozen at the center of the room. Patrice picked up her purse. She smoothed the front of her dress. Not out of nervousness, but out of habit. The kind of habit a woman has when she's about to walk out of a room she will never return to. She walked toward the exit. Her heels were steady on the marble floor, the same marble floor she had been on her knees against just weeks earlier. This time, she didn't crawl. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It happened the way foundations fail. Slowly at first, then everywhere. Within 2 weeks of that dinner, Terence's business partner initiated a full audit of the firm's accounts. 3 major clients quietly withdrew their contracts. No press releases, no formal statements. Just phone calls that went to voicemail, meetings that got rescheduled indefinitely, and handshakes that never came. Word had spread, not through gossip, but through the exact kind of professional silence that destroys a man's career without leaving fingerprints. Nobody accused Terence of anything out loud. They just stopped returning his calls. And in the world Terence had built for himself, silence was the loudest sentence. Lorraine called him 6 times the day after the dinner. He didn't answer the first 5. On the 6th, her voice came through sharp and cracked. "You told me she would never find out." He hung up without a word. She called again the next morning. He let it ring until the voicemail picked up. She didn't leave a message. Rochelle found a letter taped to her door 3 days later. It was from the law offices of Wanda Okafor, representing Patrice Washington. The letter informed her that the condominium she occupied at 1412 Piedmont Circle had been purchased using marital assets and was subject to immediate recovery proceedings. The white Mercedes registered under Terence's LLC was flagged for repossession. Rochelle called Terence. He didn't answer. She called Lorraine. Lorraine picked up, said 4 words, "I can't be involved," and hung up. Rochelle sat in that condo for 2 hours with the letter in her hand. The same condo she had walked through like she owned it. The same condo she had filled with throw pillows and scented candles and a framed photograph of her and Terence that she kept on the nightstand in the bedroom. Now the walls felt like they were pressing in, and for the first time, the quiet in that building didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the quiet of a place that was never really hers. Terence showed up at the house one evening. The front door was unlocked. The hallway was dim. He walked upstairs and opened the master bedroom closet. Patrice's side was empty. Dresses gone. Shoes gone. The shelf where she kept her jewelry box. Bare. On the kitchen counter, she had left one thing, a framed photograph from their wedding day. Face down. He picked it up and turned it over. On the back, in Patrice's handwriting, the same handwriting that used to leave him notes in his briefcase, were 3 words. "You had everything." He stood in that kitchen alone for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. The faucet dripped once. He turned the photograph over again and read the 3 words one more time. Then he set it face down exactly how he found it and walked out to his car. He sat in the driveway with the engine off for 20 minutes. He didn't call anyone. He didn't drive anywhere. He just sat there, staring at the garage door of a house that no longer felt like it belonged to him. The divorce filing arrived the following week. Patrice's attorney presented Glenn's forensic accounting report to the court. It was thorough, time-stamped, annotated with precision that left no room for interpretation. Every hidden transfer, every shell, LLC, every deposit into the Midtown property, every monthly payment on the Mercedes. The judge reviewed the first 12 pages, removed her reading glasses, and ordered an immediate asset freeze pending full review. Terence's legal team attempted to object. They argued the evidence had been obtained without proper authorization. The judge looked at them over the top of her bench and said that a wife reviewing her own joint financial records does not constitute a breach of privacy. Objection denied. The firm anniversary celebration was supposed to be the night Terence introduced Rochelle to the world. Instead, it became the night the world saw exactly who he was and the people who were in that room, the partners, the clients, the colleagues, the friends. They did not forget. Not the silence. Not the folder. Not the woman who stood up with steady hands and told the truth without ever raising her voice. 14 months later, the morning light in Savannah, Georgia came through the windows a little softer than it did in Atlanta. A little slower, like the city itself was in no rush to prove anything to anyone. Patrice sat in the corner booth of a small cafe on Broughton Street. She came here every Saturday morning now. Same booth, same coffee. Black, no sugar. Same book resting open beside a blueberry muffin she hadn't touched yet. The owner knew her name. The barista had her order ready before she reached the counter. She had moved to Savannah 3 months after the divorce was finalized. She worked as a freelance financial consultant. Her own practice, her own schedule, her own name on the door. She liked the work. She liked the quiet. She liked the fact that every dollar in her account was earned by her own hands and belonged to no one else. The pearl bracelet was back on her wrist. She had asked for it during the asset division. Not the house, not the cars, not the artwork on the walls or the furniture in the living room. She asked for one thing, the bracelet her grandmother had given her the morning of her wedding, the one she had placed on the table in front of Terence at Monarch's, the one that carried the weight of every decision she had ever made about her own worth. Her attorney retrieved it without issue. Terence didn't fight for it. He probably didn't even remember what it meant. But Patrice did. Her phone buzzed softly on the table. A text from Glenn's wife. "Brunch next Sunday." Patrice smiled, the kind of real smile that starts behind the eyes, and typed back, "I'll bring the wine." She closed her book and took a slow sip of coffee. The cafe was quiet. A couple in the far corner shared a newspaper. A man near the window wrote something careful in a leather journal. The morning had nowhere else to be. As she stood to leave, she passed a television mounted on the wall near the register. A local business segment was airing, the kind of background noise nobody watches unless they're waiting on an order. A list of companies under financial review scrolled across the bottom of the screen. One of the names was Terence's firm. His face appeared on screen for 2 seconds. A small corporate photo beside the headline. Patrice glanced at it the way someone glances at weather they've already dressed for. She didn't stop. She didn't stare. She picked up her purse and walked toward the door. Outside, the Savannah sun hit the cobblestone street in long, golden lines. She stepped off the curb and crossed toward her office. The pearl bracelet caught the morning light on her wrist. The same bracelet that had caught the candlelight at Monarch's. The same bracelet her grandmother had clasped on her skin all those years ago and whispered, "Wear it when you're sure." She was sure now, not of someone else, of herself, of her hands and her mind and her ability to build something that no one could take from her because it was rooted in truth instead of promises. She reached the storefront and looked up at the glass door. Her name was etched in clean black letters. The name she was born with, not the one she had borrowed for 7 years. She pulled the door open, stepped inside, and set her purse on the desk she had picked out herself. The office was small. The walls were still bare, but the morning light came through the window and fell across the floor in a way that made the whole room feel like it was breathing. She sat down, she opened her laptop, and she began her day. Sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is not fight, not scream, not break down in a room full of people waiting for her to shatter. Sometimes the strongest thing she can do is stay quiet long enough to see the whole picture, to gather her truth piece by piece. And then, when the moment is right, to stand up in a room full of silence and let the truth speak for itself. Dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It doesn't crawl across marble floors to prove its worth. Dignity stands up, walks out, and builds something new on the other side. If this story reminded you that silence isn't weakness, that a woman who says nothing might be saying everything, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, join this channel, because every story we tell here is about the moment someone decided they were worth more than what they were given.